The mountains were silent that winter, wrapped in thick layers of snow like a sleeping giant under a heavy white blanket. Far away from towns, roads, and the sound of cars, there stood an old wooden shelter built at the edge of a steep ridge. It had belonged to Ethan's grandfather, who had always said the mountain gave peace to those who listened carefully. Ethan believed that. He had spent many winters here, surrounded by tall pine trees, frozen lakes, and the kind of silence you couldn't find anywhere else. Ethan was a quiet man who loved the outdoors. He worked in the city, but every year when the snow came down and the world outside seemed to slow, he packed his backpack and hiked up to the mountain shelter. It wasn't fancy, just a small wooden house with a stone fireplace, a single bedroom, and a kitchen with a gas stove that worked if you treated it gently. But for Ethan, it was more than enough. This year, the snow had arrived earlier than usual. It was only the first week of December, and already the mountain was dressed in white from top to bottom. Ethan had been looking forward to this trip for months. The city had become loud, busy, and full of problems that made his mind feel heavy. Up here in the quiet, he felt like he could breathe again. The journey to the cabin wasn't easy. He had to hike for hours through narrow trails covered with snow. Each step made a soft crunching sound. His breath came out in small white clouds. His boots sank into the snow with each step, but he didn't mind. The cold air filled his lungs, and the view of the snow-covered forest made him smile. Tall pine trees stood like guards on both sides of the path. Their branches bent slightly under the weight of the snow, and when a strong breeze blew, white powder drifted down like falling feathers. As he got closer to the shelter, Ethan felt a warm kind of excitement. The place was more than a cabin. It was a piece of his past. His grandfather had built it with his own hands many decades ago. Ethan remembered visiting as a child, sitting on the old man's lap, listening to stories about brave climbers and hidden paths through the mountain. Back then, the cabin had felt like a magic place, and even now, as an adult, it still carried that feeling. Finally, after nearly 6 hours of walking, he reached the clearing where the cabin stood. Snow had piled up against the walls and around the wooden porch. The roof was covered in a thick layer of white, and icicles hung down like little glass knives catching the light. The chimney was quiet, waiting for its first fire of the season. Ethan climbed the small steps carefully, brushed off the snow, and pushed the door open. The inside smelled like wood and thyme. It hadn't changed much. The same rocking chair sat in the corner near the fireplace. The small table stood beside the window, where he used to sit with his grandfather to drink hot chocolate. There were shelves with old books, a stack of firewood, and a blanket folded neatly on the bed. Dust floated in the air, shining in the weak light that came through the window. Ethan set his backpack down and gave the place a good look. A wave of peace settled over him. He pulled off his gloves and hat, rubbed his hands together to warm them, and then lit a small lantern. The warm yellow light spread softly across the room. Outside, the wind began to pick up, brushing against the wooden walls with a low hum. He walked outside again to gather more firewood before it got dark. The forest behind the cabin was quiet except for the sound of the wind moving through the trees. He liked this quiet. It wasn't empty. It was alive in its own gentle way. There were tiny footprints of rabbits in the snow, and he saw a bird shake snow from its feathers and fly off toward the treetops. He filled his arms with dry logs, carried them inside, and stacked them neatly beside the fireplace. Soon the room filled with the comforting crackle of burning wood. Ethan sat down on the rocking chair and took a deep breath. The warmth from the fire wrapped around him like a soft blanket. He could hear the snowstorm beginning to form outside, soft at first, like whispers. It was the kind of night that made him feel grateful for a roof over his head and a warm fire to keep him safe. As the evening settled in, Ethan made himself a simple dinner, hot soup and bread he had brought with him. The steam from the pot rose into the air, mixing with the scent of burning wood. He ate slowly, enjoying every bite, listening to the sounds around him. The wind outside was now stronger, tapping against the window. Snowflakes swirled like little dancers in the dark. After dinner, he took out an old photo frame from his backpack. Inside was a black and white picture of his grandfather standing in front of the same cabin. He was younger in the photo, wearing a thick coat and a proud smile. Ethan placed the frame on the small table and looked at it for a long moment. "Still here, Grandpa," he whispered softly. The hours passed quietly. Ethan read a few pages from one of the old books on the shelf. It was about mountain explorers and their adventures in harsh winters. The words felt alive in this place as if they belonged here. From time to time the wind howled outside, making the old wooden walls creak. But inside, the fire burned strong and the warmth didn't let the cold in. Ethan checked the radio on the shelf, a small battery-powered device he always brought for emergencies. It was working fine and he could hear distant static. He turned it off, satisfied. Tomorrow he planned to hike to a nearby frozen lake, maybe do a bit of fishing and take some photos of the sunrise. He had no idea that everything would change before the night was over. As midnight came closer, the storm outside grew louder. Snow hit the windows like handfuls of sand. The wind rushed through the trees, making them bend and groan. The forest no longer sounded peaceful. It sounded alive in a different way, wild and untamed. Ethan stirred the fire, making sure it wouldn't die during the night. Then he climbed into the small bed, pulled the thick blanket over himself and closed his eyes. He lay there for a while, listening to the storm. It was strange how the sound could be both frightening and calming at the same time. The wind roared, but inside the cabin he felt safe. His body relaxed slowly and his breathing evened out. He was almost asleep when he thought he heard something different from the storm, a faint sound like footsteps in the snow. He opened his eyes and listened carefully. Nothing but wind. He told himself it was probably just a tree branch falling or snow sliding off the roof. The cabin often made strange sounds during heavy storms. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the noise had been too steady, too rhythmic, like a person walking. He pulled the blanket closer and tried to ignore it. The fire crackled gently. The wind howled again. Silence followed. Then the sound came again. A soft, dull thud. This time it was closer, right outside the door. Ethan sat up slowly, his heart beating a little faster now. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost 1 a.m. No one ever came up here during storms. It was too dangerous. He thought about wild animals, but the sound didn't match any he knew. It was too slow, too careful. He grabbed the lantern from the table, its warm light flickering as he moved. The shadows danced along the wooden walls. Ethan stepped softly to the window and lifted the curtain just enough to peek outside. At first, he saw nothing but swirling snow and darkness. The storm made it hard to see beyond a few feet. Then, just near the steps of the porch, he noticed a dark shape, a figure standing still in the snow. His breath caught in his throat. It was too tall and too still to be an animal. Whoever it was stood without moving, as if listening to the wind. Snow covered their shoulders and hair, blending them into the storm. Ethan didn't move. The figure didn't either. For a long moment it felt like time had stopped. Only the wind moved between them. Then the figure slowly stepped forward and raised an arm to knock on the door again. 3 soft, clear knocks. Ethan took a deep breath. The storm outside was dangerous, and leaving anyone out there could mean something terrible. His grandfather had always said, "A mountain shelters everyone in need." But Ethan's heart still pounded. He didn't know who this person was or why they were out here in such a storm. He reached for the door, his hand hovering over the handle. The wind howled louder, as if warning him. Snow blew through the tiny cracks near the doorframe. Finally, he pulled it open just a little. The wind pushed in, freezing air wrapping around him. And there, standing on the porch, was a woman. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, and her hair stuck to her wet cheeks. She looked tired, cold, and lost. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was weak but clear. "Can I come in?" Ethan hesitated for only a second. Then he nodded and stepped aside. She stumbled through the door, and as soon as he closed it behind her, the storm swallowed the outside world again, leaving only the sound of wind pressing against the walls. Inside the cabin, the fire glowed softly. The woman stood shivering, water dripping from her coat. Ethan didn't know who she was, but one thing was certain. This night on the mountain was no longer going to be like the others. Ethan closed the door behind the woman and pressed his back gently against it, as if to keep the storm out. The sound of the wind was louder now, shaking the wooden walls and rattling the small window panes. Snowflakes swirled outside, but inside the fire burned with a soft orange glow, warming the air around them. The woman stood near the door, breathing fast, her shoulders trembling. Her coat was soaked from the snow, and her boots left a small trail of melting water on the wooden floor. Her cheeks were pale and her lips had turned light blue from the cold. Ethan could see she had been out in the storm for a long time. He didn't say anything at first. He just moved closer to the fire, grabbed an extra blanket from the shelf and wrapped it gently around her shoulders. She didn't resist. She just closed her eyes and held the blanket tightly as if it was the only warm thing in the world. "You're freezing," Ethan said softly, his voice steady but kind. "Sit by the fire. It'll warm you up." She nodded weakly and walked closer to the fireplace, sitting down on the small rug. The firelight danced across her face, making her eyes look brighter, though they were still tired. Her hands shook slightly as she stretched them toward the flames. Ethan filled a pot with water, placed it on the stove, and started to make hot tea. The old kettle whistled softly as it warmed up. The storm roared outside, but the little cabin felt like a small island of light and warmth in the middle of a white ocean. After a few minutes, he handed her a steaming cup. She held it carefully, as if afraid it might slip through her hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was soft and calm, but it carried a weight, like someone who had walked through something much bigger than just a snowstorm. Ethan sat down across from her on the rocking chair, still watching her carefully. "What were you doing out there?" he asked gently. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cup. For a long moment she didn't speak. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with its warm sound. I got lost," she finally said. "I came up here to hike earlier today. The weather was clear in the morning. I thought I could reach the valley by night, but the storm came too fast. I couldn't find my way back." Her words were slow and quiet, but honest. Ethan nodded. He knew the mountain well, and he also knew how quickly the weather could change. What started as a calm day could turn into a dangerous storm in just an hour. "You were lucky to find this place," Ethan said. "Not many people know about this cabin." She lifted her eyes to meet his. There was something in her expression, a mix of relief and something else he couldn't quite name. "I saw a light through the trees," she said softly. "I followed it. If it weren't for that, I don't know what would have happened." Ethan felt a quiet chill move through him, not from fear but from the weight of what she said. The storm outside was strong enough to keep most people trapped where they were. If she hadn't seen the lantern through the window, she might not have made it through the night. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to ease the tension. "Mara," she replied, almost as if testing the sound of her own name. He nodded slowly. "I'm Ethan." For the first time since she entered, she gave him a small smile. It was faint but real. "Thank you, Ethan, for letting me in." "Of course," he said. "No one should be out in that kind of storm." Mara finished her tea slowly, her hands still wrapped around the cup to soak in the warmth. Her cheeks were starting to get some color back. Ethan took her wet coat and hung it on the wooden rack by the door. He placed her boots near the fire so they would dry overnight. The hours passed slowly, but neither of them felt the need to rush. The storm outside kept building, howling louder than before, as if the wind itself was alive. Ethan put more logs into the fire, and the flames grew stronger, filling the room with a golden glow. Mara watched the fire, almost lost in thought. "Were you hiking alone?" Ethan asked gently after a while. She nodded. "Yes, I like being in nature. It clears my mind. I didn't think the weather would change so fast." Ethan could understand that. He too came to the mountains to escape the noise of the world. But something about her calmness in the middle of the storm made him curious. Most people who got stuck out here would be panicking, but Mara wasn't. She was quiet, steady, almost too calm. "You must be tired," he said. "You can rest here tonight. There's only one bedroom, but I can sleep near the fire. It's warm enough here." Mara looked at him with grateful eyes. "Thank you. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Ethan said simply. She smiled again, a little more this time, the kind of smile that made her look less like a stranger and more like someone who belonged to this quiet place. Ethan brought out a second blanket and laid it near the fire for himself. He didn't mind. He loved the sound of the crackling wood at night. Mara sat quietly for a long time, watching the snow fall outside the window. Even with the storm raging, there was something strangely peaceful about it. After some time, she asked softly, "Have you lived here long?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I only come here in winter. The cabin belonged to my grandfather. He built it a long time ago. This place has been my escape since I was a kid. When life gets too loud down there," he pointed toward the valley below, "I come up here to listen to the quiet." She nodded slowly, her eyes drifting to the photo of his grandfather on the table. "It must be nice," she said, "to have a place like this." "It is," he admitted. It feels like the mountain remembers me. Every time I come back, it's like nothing has changed. The world down there moves too fast. But here time stands still. Mara's gaze softened. I think I understand that more than you think. Ethan didn't ask what she meant. He could tell by her tone that her words carried a story, maybe one she wasn't ready to share. He respected that. They both sat quietly again, listening to the storm wrap around the cabin like a wild animal circling a warm light. After a while, Ethan handed her a thick wool sweater from the shelf. You should wear this, he said. It'll help keep you warm tonight. She accepted it and slipped it over her shirt. It hung a little loose on her, but she didn't seem to mind. It's warm, she said softly. Thank you. The wind banged against the window suddenly, making the glass tremble. Mara flinched slightly, her hands tightening around the edge of the sweater. Ethan stood up and checked the latch. The window was still firm. It happens, he reassured her. The wind can be loud here, but the cabin is strong. It's been through many storms. She nodded, but he could see that she was still uneasy. She wasn't used to being so far from everything, especially in a storm like this. Ethan went back to his place near the fire. Hours passed. The night grew deeper. The storm outside became heavier, wrapping the cabin in a thick, cold silence that came and went with each gust of wind. Mara lay down in the small bedroom, wrapped in the extra blanket Ethan had given her. Ethan stayed in the main room, watching the fire slowly burn lower. He wasn't used to having someone else here. For years, these trips had been his alone. The mountain had always felt like a friend that belonged only to him. But tonight was different. The quiet had a new shape, a new presence. Just when he was about to drift into sleep, he heard a sound, a soft creak from the floorboards. It was a sound he knew well. It came from the hallway between the bedroom and the main room. Ethan sat up slightly, listening. Mara appeared at the edge of the hallway, holding the blanket tightly around her shoulders. Her hair was loose now, falling gently around her face. She looked both tired and uncertain. Can't sleep? Ethan asked softly. She shook her head. The wind. It's too loud. It feels like it's everywhere. He gave her a reassuring smile. It always sounds worse at night. But it won't hurt us. The storm can't get in. She moved closer to the fire and sat down on the rug again. The light flickered across her face, making her look calm and fragile at the same time. Ethan didn't say anything for a while. He just added more wood to the fire, and together they watched the flames grow higher. Strange, she whispered after a while. I've never felt so far from everything before. It's like the world outside doesn't exist anymore. Ethan understood that feeling too well. That's what the mountain does, he said softly. It takes away the noise, but it can also make the silence feel very big. Mara looked into the fire as if it might give her answers. I thought being alone was what I wanted, she said. But when the storm started, I realized how small I was. I've never felt so lost. Ethan looked at her not with pity but with quiet understanding. You're not lost anymore, he said. You found this place. For the first time, Mara's shoulders relaxed completely. She wrapped the blanket closer around herself and let out a slow breath. I'm glad I did, she whispered. The fire burned steady now, its warm light pushing back against the cold night. The storm outside continued to howl, but it no longer felt like a threat. Inside the small wooden cabin, there was a quiet connection growing. A gentle, unspoken bond between two people who had both come to the mountains searching for something. Neither of them knew that the night ahead would change everything. But for now, they sat side by side, listening to the storm wrapped in the warmth of the fire and in the strange, calm stillness of the mountain. Ethan woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, though he wasn't sure why. The fire in the fireplace had burned down to glowing embers, filling the cabin with a soft orange light. Outside, the storm had not calmed. The wind still rushed past the walls, making them creak softly as if whispering secrets. Snow hit the windows gently now, not as fiercely as before, but steady, like fingers tapping on glass. He blinked a few times, adjusting to the dim light. Something felt different. The quiet inside the cabin was too deep, too still. It was the kind of silence that made his heartbeat sound louder in his own ears. For a moment, Ethan lay still on the rug near the fire, wrapped in his blanket, listening carefully. Then he heard it, a soft sound almost too light to catch at first. A gentle creak from the wooden floorboards, not the kind that came from the wind or the old house settling. This was different. It was slow. Like footsteps, Ethan sat up carefully. He turned his head toward the hallway that led to the bedroom. A thin strip of light from the last flame touched the edge of the open door. The floor creaked again. He could feel his breath grow slower, his senses sharpened without him trying. Then he saw her. Mara was standing just inside the bedroom doorway. She wasn't wearing her coat anymore, just the thick sweater he had given her and the blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Her hair fell softly around her face. But what caught Ethan's attention wasn't how she looked. It was how still she was. She stood completely silent, her hands holding the edge of the doorframe, her gaze fixed straight ahead at him. "Mara?" Ethan's voice came out quiet and uncertain. She didn't answer right away. The storm outside filled the silence between them. Then very slowly she stepped forward. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly. Her voice was calm, but it carried something Ethan couldn't quite place. A weight, a quiet intensity that felt unfamiliar. "The storm's loud," he replied, trying to sound calm himself. "I had trouble sleeping too." Mara walked toward the fire. Her steps were quiet, but each one seemed to echo inside the cabin, filling up the empty spaces. She stopped a few steps away from him and looked at the fire as if lost in thought. "It's strange," she whispered. "I've been out in storms before, but this one feels different. It doesn't just sound outside. It feels like it's inside too." Ethan didn't know exactly what she meant, but he could sense the uneasiness in her words. The cabin had always been his safe place, but tonight, something in the air felt heavier. He tried to shake the thought away. "Sometimes storms do that," he said gently. "They make everything feel closer, even silence." She turned to him then, and her eyes caught the last bits of light from the fire. For a heartbeat, they looked brighter. Not frightening, just too deep, like a reflection of something far away. She slowly sat down on the rug near the fire, wrapping the blanket tighter around her. "It's warm here," she said quietly, almost like a child talking to herself. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, it's warm." They sat like that for a while. The fire crackled softly. The storm whispered outside. Mara's breathing slowed down, and for a moment everything felt calm again. But just when Ethan started to relax, she spoke again, her voice low, almost like a secret. "You won't leave this bed until I'm yours." The words fell into the room like a stone into still water, sending small invisible ripples through the quiet. Ethan blinked. At first he thought he had misheard her. Her voice had been so soft that it could have been anything. A dream, a thought, something the storm carried. "Mara, what did you say?" She didn't answer immediately. She kept looking at the fire, the light moving across her face. Then she gave a small smile, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. "Nothing," she whispered. "Just talking to myself." Ethan nodded slowly, unsure of what to make of it. Maybe she was half asleep, maybe just tired and saying things without thinking. After all, she had been out in the storm for hours. But a quiet unease started to form in the back of his mind. He decided to focus on something else. "You should try to get some rest," he said gently. "The storm might last a few more days. Tomorrow we can figure out a way to contact someone." She tilted her head slightly. "You don't have to worry," she said softly. "I'm fine here. I feel like I've been here before." Ethan frowned lightly. "Before?" Mara's eyes remained on the fire, but her expression softened as if she were remembering something far away. "It feels familiar," she said. "Like I know this place. The sound of the wind, the way the wood creaks, even the smell of the fire. It's like I've been here before." A long time ago. Ethan felt a quiet shiver run through him. He knew she couldn't have been here. This cabin wasn't marked on any map. Only a few people knew about it, his grandfather, his father, and now him. "You must be imagining it," Ethan said gently. "Storms can make things feel strange. It's easy to mix up memories when you're tired." She gave a small nod but didn't look entirely convinced. She sat closer to the fire, resting her head on her knees, wrapped in the blanket like a cocoon. Ethan leaned back against the rocking chair. His mind was awake now, even though it was still the middle of the night. He thought about her words. "I feel like I've been here before." How could that be? He stared at the snow outside for a while, watching the wind dance across the dark window. It was easy to get lost in the storm. A quiet sound pulled him back. Mara was humming softly, a tune so gentle it almost melted into the crackle of the fire. It wasn't a song Ethan recognized, but it had a strange old rhythm. It reminded him of the lullabies his grandfather used to hum when he was a child, though he couldn't place where he'd heard it before. Where did you learn that song? Ethan asked quietly. She stopped humming and lifted her head slowly. Her eyes met his, steady and calm. I don't remember, she said. It just comes to me sometimes, like it's always been there. Ethan didn't press further, but inside he felt something shift. This night wasn't like other nights in the cabin. It was as if the walls themselves were listening, holding their breath. A gust of wind hit the door suddenly, making it rattle in its frame. Mara flinched, her hands gripping the blanket tighter. It's just the wind, Ethan said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. She nodded, but he could tell she was uneasy. The wind sounds like someone whispering, she said. He listened closely. It was just wind. But he had to admit sometimes in the middle of storms like this, the wind really did sound like voices. He had experienced it before. Maybe that was what she meant. You should rest, he said again, trying to bring some calm back, but Mara didn't move. She kept sitting near the fire, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the door now, as if listening for something outside. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Are you okay? She nodded slowly. Yes, but I don't like the way the night feels. It's like the mountain is awake. Ethan gave a soft breath of a laugh, though it didn't come out as easily as he'd hoped. The mountain's always awake, he said. You just notice it more when it's this quiet. For the first time, she smiled genuinely. Maybe you're right. Ethan stood and carefully added more wood to the fire. Sparks flew upward, lighting the cabin a little more. He glanced at the old clock on the wall. It was almost 3 a.m. I'm going to stay here for the rest of the night, Ethan said. If you can't sleep, that's okay. The fire will keep us warm. Mara didn't answer right away. She simply nodded and lay down near the fire again, curling up with the blanket. She looked peaceful in the soft light, but Ethan's mind couldn't let go of the earlier words. You won't leave this bed until I'm yours. The way she had said it so softly, like a half-remembered promise. It stayed with him, echoing quietly in his thoughts. He told himself it didn't mean anything. People said strange things when they were exhausted or scared. It was normal, but deep down he felt something in the air that didn't feel like exhaustion. It felt familiar in a way he couldn't explain. Slowly, the fire's warmth wrapped around them like a soft blanket. Mara's breathing grew slow and steady, and eventually she fell asleep on the rug. Ethan didn't sleep. He stayed sitting, staring at the flames, listening to the whispers of the storm outside. Somewhere between the wind's song and the crackle of the fire, Ethan felt the mountain holding its breath, as if it too was listening. He didn't know why the night felt so different, but something inside him whispered that this was only the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. Ethan opened his eyes slowly, blinking at the soft light of the morning sun trying to break through the thick layer of snow covering the windows. The storm had not completely passed, but it had softened into a slow, steady fall of flakes that drifted lazily from the sky. It was quiet now, not the frightening kind of quiet that comes in the middle of a storm, but the stillness that follows after something wild has finally decided to rest. He stretched his arms and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. The fire had died down to a few warm coals. The air was chilly but calm. For a moment he forgot everything about the strange words Mara had whispered the night before. He forgot about the uneasy feeling that had wrapped itself around the cabin like an invisible thread. For a small second it felt like a normal winter morning in the mountains. But then he noticed something. Mara was no longer on the rug where she had fallen asleep. The blanket lay folded in a way that looked too neat, too intentional. The sweater he had given her was gone too. His eyes moved slowly toward the door and his heart gave a quiet, uncertain beat. The door was locked from the inside. She hadn't left the cabin. Mara? He called softly. No answer. Only the soft sound of snow pressing gently against the roof. He stood up and walked quietly toward the bedroom. The door was slightly open, the air inside colder than the rest of the cabin. He pushed it gently and peered inside. The room was empty. For a second he felt the quiet stretch around him, long and strange. Then he noticed the window. It was closed, but on the inside of the glass there were faint traces, like the shape of someone's hand pressed there during the night. He touched it. It was cold, smooth, and left no sign of how it got there. Mara, he called again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. Ethan turned slowly back toward the main room. That was when he saw it, something he hadn't noticed before. On the small wooden table beside the fireplace where the photo of his grandfather usually stood, There was now something else. A small piece of folded paper. It hadn't been there the night before. His hands felt slightly cold as he picked it up. The paper was thin, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times. Inside, written in careful handwriting, were just a few words. "I have been here before." Ethan's chest felt tight, not from fear, but from confusion that came in slow, heavy waves. She had said those exact words last night, her voice calm, her eyes distant. But how could she have known this place? He walked around the cabin carefully, checking every corner, every shelf, as if he might find a trace of her hiding behind something. But there was nothing. Only the quiet warmth of the wood, the smell of old smoke, and the whisper of snow outside. His next thought was the trail. If she had gone outside, there would be footprints. He grabbed his coat, opened the door, and stepped onto the porch. The cold air rushed against his face, sharp and clear. The ground was covered with a fresh layer of soft snow, and that was the strange thing. There were no footprints at all. The snow was smooth, untouched, like no one had walked through it since last night. He stepped carefully down the stairs and turned in a slow circle, scanning the ground. Nothing. No marks, no paths. No sign of Mara. It was as if she had simply melted into the quiet morning. He stayed out there longer than he meant to, listening. The forest was silent. Even the birds seemed to be hiding. His breath rose in small clouds in the air. When he finally stepped back inside, the cabin felt different. Not colder, not darker, just emptier, like a part of the night had disappeared with her, leaving behind a question with no shape and no answer. Ethan sat down on the chair near the fire, staring at the note on the table. He turned it over, half expecting more words to appear on the back, but it was blank. His mind tried to make sense of it logically. Maybe she woke up early and walked off. Maybe she knew a path he didn't. But that didn't explain the snow. She would have left footprints. His gaze drifted to the old photograph of his grandfather. Something about the way the picture sat on the shelf now caught his attention. He picked it up and held it close. For years he had seen this picture. His grandfather standing in front of the cabin, snow all around. But now as he looked carefully, his eyes caught a detail he had always ignored. Behind his grandfather, in the far corner of the picture, was a faint figure. A woman standing near the trees. It was blurry, almost fading into the background, but she was there. Ethan stared at it, his heartbeat slowing down. He brought the photo closer to the lantern light, studying the shape carefully. She was wrapped in a blanket, her hair falling over her shoulders. Her face was turned slightly toward the camera. He didn't want to say it out loud. But she looked like Mara. The snow outside continued to fall, soft and quiet. Inside, Ethan's thoughts moved in circles. He tried to convince himself it was just a coincidence. It had to be. Maybe she reminded him of the woman in the old photo. Maybe the cold, the storm, and the long night had blurred his mind. But then his eyes fell on another detail. Something carved faintly into the wooden beam above the bed in the small room. It wasn't new. It had been there for years, a small line of writing that he had never paid much attention to. His grandfather had carved a lot of things into this cabin. But now, standing in the soft morning light, Ethan could read it clearly. She always finds her way back. He stepped closer and traced the words with his fingers. The wood was smooth with age, but the letters were sharp, almost as if someone had carved them carefully, slowly, as though they wanted the message to last forever. She, he whispered to himself. The wind blew softly against the windows, making the cabin groan gently, almost like a sigh. Ethan sat back down, holding the photo and the note in his hands, his mind filled with quiet questions. Who was Mara? How did she know this place? Why were there no footprints in the snow? The rest of the day passed slowly, like time itself was moving through heavy air. Ethan lit the fire again and made a simple breakfast, though he barely touched it. He kept glancing at the door as if expecting it to open and for Mara to step back in, smiling the way she had last night, calm and warm. But the door stayed shut. At one point he tried turning on the radio to call for help. But the signal was gone, just as it had been during the storm. The silence on the other end of the radio felt heavier than the wind outside. He thought about hiking down to the village, but the snow was deep, and he knew the path would be dangerous alone. He also couldn't shake the feeling that she might come back, so he stayed. As the afternoon slipped into evening, the sky turned a soft gray. The snow outside glowed faintly, almost silver in the fading light. Ethan found himself staring at the window again, the same way Mara had the night before. He imagined seeing her walking out from the tree line, her hair catching the wind, her eyes calm, her voice soft. But she didn't come. And then, just as the last light of the day disappeared, something shifted in the cabin. Not loud, not sudden, just a small sound, like the faintest creak from the wooden floor. Ethan turned his head slowly toward the bedroom. There, on the bed, was the blanket she had taken with her, folded neatly again. His breath caught in his throat, not from fear but from the quiet weight of it all. He stood and walked toward the room slowly, each step measured and careful. He reached out and touched the blanket. It was warm, not from the fire, from something else. The cabin was quiet again, the kind of quiet that didn't belong only to the wind and snow. It was a quiet that felt like someone was still there, just out of sight. Ethan sat down at the edge of the bed, the soft creak of the wood echoing through the room. His eyes went to the words carved above him. She always finds her way back. The night would come again soon, and with it, the soft song of the storm, the whispers in the wood, and maybe her. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. He sat for hours beside the fireplace, the warmth from the flames slowly fading as the logs turned into glowing embers. The snow outside had stopped falling, leaving the world covered in a quiet, endless sheet of white. The wind had softened into a gentle whisper, brushing against the walls of the cabin like a soft hand. He held the old photograph of his grandfather in one hand and the folded note Mara had left in the other. His mind felt like a room full of echoes, each question bouncing off the walls, coming back to him unanswered. Mara was gone, but the air inside the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt as if someone was still here, breathing quietly in a corner he couldn't see. Every time the floor creaked, every time the wind touched the glass, Ethan turned his head, expecting to see her standing near the door or the window. But she never appeared. Morning light came slowly, shining faintly through the frosted windows. The mountain was calm again. No wind, no snow, only stillness. Ethan put on his coat, stepped outside, and looked around the clearing. The snow was perfect, smooth, untouched. No footprints. It looked as though nothing and no one had ever walked there. He stood in the cold for a long time, listening. The world was silent, but not in a lonely way. It was as if the mountain was holding a secret it didn't want to share. For years, this place had been Ethan's safe space, his quiet corner of the world. But after meeting Mara, it felt different. It wasn't less peaceful, just more alive. It felt like something had always been here, waiting, and now he could feel it. He walked back inside and closed the door softly behind him. His eyes went to the carved words above the bed again. She always finds her way back. When he was a boy, he had never paid attention to those words. He thought they were just something his grandfather carved for fun, like the little drawings of pine trees on the shelves or the carved initials on the porch railing. But now they didn't feel playful at all. They felt like a message, a reminder. He sat down at the small table and stared at the photo again. His grandfather stood proudly in front of the cabin, and there, faint in the background, the shape of a woman, Mara's shape. He traced the edge of the photo with his finger. His grandfather had never told him stories about her, but maybe some stories weren't meant to be told with words. Ethan lit a new fire, made some tea, and sat in silence. He didn't try to explain everything anymore. He simply let the quiet settle around him like snow on the ground. Around midday, a soft noise broke the silence. It wasn't the storm. It wasn't the wind. It was something gentle, like a distant melody. At first he thought he was imagining it, but then it grew clearer, threading through the air like a familiar tune. It was the same song Mara had hummed on that night by the fire. Soft, slow, almost like a lullaby. Ethan's heartbeat slowed as he stood up. He followed the sound, each step careful, quiet. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the bedroom. He pushed the door gently. The room looked the same. The bed, the wooden floor, the faint morning light. But on the windowsill, where frost had gathered, there was something new. A shape traced carefully into the thin layer of ice. A heart. Inside it, the word "here" was drawn. The melody faded slowly, like a wave pulling back into the ocean. Ethan stepped closer to the window. His hand hovered above the frosted glass, and for a moment he felt warmth. Not from the fire, not from the sun, but from something softer, like someone's presence was standing right beside him, quiet and kind. He whispered her name.
Mara!
The window pane trembled lightly, though there was no wind outside. He stayed there for a long time, looking at the small heart on the glass. Later that afternoon, when the sun was already low and golden light filled the room, Ethan decided to go through the old chest that belonged to his grandfather. It had been in the cabin for decades. He had opened it many times before, but he had never really paid attention to what was inside. Mostly old tools, folded blankets, and a few notebooks. This time, he opened the notebooks carefully. Inside were handwritten pages filled with his grandfather's neat writing. Most of it was about hunting trips, weather records, and fishing notes. But near the end of one book, he found something different, a short passage. The woman came again last winter. She never speaks loudly, only whispers near the fire. She is not dangerous. She only appears when the mountain is covered in snow. She finds her way to this place every time. I do not ask questions. I let her be. She belongs here more than I ever will. Ethan ran his fingers slowly across the page. His grandfather had seen her too. Mara. Or maybe someone like her. He kept reading. One night, I asked her name. She only smiled and said, "This is my home." And I believed her. She never stays long. When the storm ends, she disappears. No footprints. No goodbye. Only silence. But every year when the snow falls again, she returns. Ethan closed the notebook gently. His heart didn't race. Instead, a strange calm filled him. It was like pieces of a quiet puzzle were slowly falling into place. She wasn't lost. She had never been lost. She belonged to this mountain, to this cabin. To the quiet, Ethan went outside again before the sun set. The air was sharp and clear, and the snow shone like tiny diamonds under the fading light. He stood at the edge of the clearing and looked out toward the line of trees where the forest began. For a moment, he thought he saw movement between the trees, a soft shape, pale against the dark trunks. A figure standing still, watching. It didn't scare him. In fact, he felt something warm spread through his chest. "Mara," he whispered again. The shape didn't move closer. It didn't fade either. It just stood there, quiet and calm, as if the mountain itself had formed her out of snow and memory. Then slowly she lifted her hand. A gentle wave. Ethan lifted his hand too, his fingers cold but steady. Then the shape turned and disappeared into the forest, like mist melting into the air. No sound, no footprints, just the quiet whisper of the wind brushing past the trees. When he went back inside, the cabin didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive, like every wall, every window, every piece of wood carried a quiet heartbeat. He sat by the fire again, listening to the logs crackle. The mountain night wrapped around him, not like a stranger, but like an old friend. The notebook lay open on the table beside him. He picked up a pen and added a new line at the bottom of his grandfather's last page. She came again this winter. She found her way back. The fire glowed brighter, as if agreeing with his words. Ethan leaned back in the rocking chair, letting the warmth fill him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone here. He understood now that the mountain wasn't just a quiet place. It had its own stories, its own keepers, its own memories. Mara was a part of it. And now, in some strange way, so was he. The wind outside began to hum softly, carrying a tune that sounded very much like the one she had hummed that night. The sound wrapped around the cabin like a gentle blanket, and Ethan closed his eyes. He didn't need to look for her anymore. She wasn't gone. She was home. And every winter, when the first storm came, he knew he would hear her soft knock on the door, see her quiet smile by the fire, and feel the strange, beautiful calm she brought with her. He whispered softly into the warm air. "You always find your way back." The fire crackled. The snow fell silently. And somewhere between the wind and the trees, a soft voice answered, not with words, but with the kind of silence that says more than any language ever could.